Hey everyone, welcome to the Fervor Review. Today I'll be discussing White by Bret, Easton, Ellis. If you're familiar with Bret Easton Ellis, or you're not, he is known for American Psycho, Less Than Zero, and The Rules of Attraction, just to name a couple titles. And also those books have also been turned into films, and I've seen at least two of the three. But White is it's a different direction. It's a nonfiction book, and it's mostly his own account of society and the world that he's seen change over time. And maybe that's more frightening as well, other than like American Psycho, for example, where I feel like his novels tend to have these very uncomfortable themes, and he just has such a great way of taking parts of society and the things he's noticed in the groups he's been in and really dramatizing them out. But in White, there is no dramatization or fictitious play on the realities of our life or in our world. It's actually truthful. It's actually real. These are the things he's experienced based on, what he's seen on social media, in films, his own books being made into films, working with other people, actors, Hollywood, because he's definitely deep into Hollywood, that scene, living in California, living in New York, and just other controversies he's noticed during aftermath of several events that have occurred in our lifetime. What's interesting about this book is, he hones in on like the Hollywood change in kind of the social sensitivity, but also like the political climate, and focusing on the 2016 presidential election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and how things got very escalated very quickly, and how like this kind of division really started to happen in our society, at least American society, and kind of our political values, and how it really changed how people interacted with each other, especially during the election time, what we're experiencing right now in 2024. And that's the reason why I wanted to review this book. Is for the past 6 months, I've been paying more attention to certain political outlets based off of some of the social things I've seen, and like the workplace change, and a lot of the content out there, and how people are interacting with each other, that things have been more highlighted to me, especially this past year. And I came across White just because I got on a really big Bret Easton Ellis kick. He's like my favorite author. And this book was just very shocking to me, that this author who's been, he's been a published author, I think, since 1984. And he has just seen these gradual shifts in our society, and how the circles he's been around have really shifted. And he talks about how people are, men and women, how they're objectified, their sexuality. He's a gay man himself, and how being gay has been portrayed in film, and what, what these directors are trying to get out of it, or how somebody who's gay, how they're perceived. Are they the queenie friend? Are they a victim? There's these like certain, I don't know if it's like cliche, or certain roles that they're kind of designated as, and why he likes other film portrayals of, men that are gay, and because them being gay had nothing to do with these other issues they had going on their other lives. But then there's other films where it's just really about affection and not having that. And it's just interesting how he explores it all. He also talks about this like sensitivity culture that he noticed starting to surface in Hollywood. So his first novel, Less Than Zero, was made into a film, and he talks about how they changed the characters around and the premise of the book because they wanted to make it more appealing and more likable and less uncomfortable for the viewer. And as he moves on to the 90s, he talks about American Psycho, and I think it's more of like an amusement for him, how American Psycho was heavily rejected by his first publisher, and then another publisher quickly picked it up, and how successful American Psycho was. Like, he thought his career was over because of that book. If you've never read it, it's probably the best thing I've ever written or read. I I don't know if I can write something like that. Probably the best thing I've ever read. But it's very hard to read. I mean, it gets very graphic and very detailed, and it's extremely violent and impressive. We'll talk about that in another video. And it's an amusement to him because eventually, like I think in 1999, it becomes a film with Christian Bale. And the main character, and he also talks about too how the main character idolizes Donald Trump, and that becomes something that he discusses later. He definitely comes back to a lot of things throughout the book, but also his book does get made into a musical in the 2000s too. So it's just kind of funny how this was such a controversial book, and many people thought he would get into trouble for it, but it like became all this whole franchise, which made him a lot of money. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that I'm glad he put it in there. But also because of the society he paints with Patrick Bateman living in New York on the Upper West Side in a fictitious neighborhood in an apartment, but also his like fascination of the things he owns, the things he likes and dislikes, and also this question if he's even real. And this whole thing is he really wants to be liked. And that's kind of like how that kind of threads into what a lot of this book is focusing on, is like this whole social media and this whole wave of, you now have these platforms where you can like things and unlike things, and then there's this whole thing where people want to be liked, right? People want to be liked, people want to follow the masses, they want to follow the trends, and it has become this huge thing. It's almost just, he writes how it's like this design of losing subjectivity and objectivity on things, because there's no reason to, you shouldn't disagree with the masses. There's no free thought. Now this inserts like the censorship that happens, this corporate censorship, the censorship society puts on each other and the individuals who are not following along with the rest of everybody else. And he also talks about like corporate censorship, and how once you do that to your employees, you stamp out passion and you silence the individual. And as individuals, we no longer, we have to live with these contradictory versions of ourselves that are not actually true to our authentic self. And I just love how he really touches on this, because it's a huge part of it, because the whole point of this book is him as an author, as an artist. Freedom of speech is a huge, important part of being an author, right? It's a huge part of being an artist in general. Think of all the content we're consuming, in films, and the things we're reading, poems, even the media, the social media, all the stuff that we're constantly consuming, and how things are being altered. He talks about working with actors and how he finds them very endearing and likable people, but the point of the actor is they can't afford to be not liked. That they're likely to go along with the status quo because they don't want to lose a job, they don't get a bad reputation, they don't want to be unliked. That's the biggest fear of an actor. So it's kind of hard to know if an actor is being authentic or really being asked for their own opinion, because that's probably the one thing they would love to do, but it's actually has, quite a price tag. They have a lot to lose if they actually can and are allowed to be open and honest, if, they didn't have so much at stake for them. And a lot of people that he interacts with have these same issues. People don't want to be public about their certain views on certain political issues, certain social issues, that they need to keep up this status in order to not lose a client or a job or, a business opportunity. Kind of becomes this thing that he keeps revisiting. And, he just definitely sits down and dissects certain topics. So definitely I recommend reading this book, because I don't want to go too in depth in everything. I mean, at that point, I might as well just read the whole book out loud. But he does it himself, and he does such a great job that I couldn't even compare. But I really like how he describes this how we look at art. He talks about how he realized after a while, after sending many tweets and conversations, that he's offended many people, not intentionally, just, like he talked about like Twitter, when Twitter was Twitter, or X was Twitter. It was just like this fun thing. You just kind of say whatever you want, just what it was for, and then people got really sensitive about it. And he stated, and I have a couple of notes I wrote down, that he came to understand that he wasn't good at recognizing what would and what wouldn't tick people off, because art had never offended him. And I really like what he said about art, how all works of art are created in the imagination of the artist, and these are by flawed and imperfect people or an individual. And you can still admire or not the aesthetics that they're trying to portray, and that he himself wanted to be damaged by art, and he wanted to be upset by it, and how it's important because it gave him a sense of empathy. It allowed him to move from the narcissism that he was around in his childhood, or maybe he had himself in his childhood, into a world of mystery and something more. And it's kind of like being confronted with these uncomfortable truths, right? And that's good for all of us, is to have these uncomfortable things to kind of reset our consciousness. And when you have a lot of censorship going on, is the concern is, are we really able to be objective? Are we creating these bubbles that is actually creating a demented form of narcissism, and that we're taking steps toward not being empathetic because we're rejecting anything that's negative, anything that opposes the masses' thoughts and perspectives and views, because we just want to be liked in the end. And he continues this whole thought, and that really is the theme of the dangers that these social medias are kind of creating, and how it's really created this very divisive divide in our culture, especially in American politics. And he focuses more on the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and how people's response to Trump being elected as president was probably nothing like maybe most people had ever seen. And I never really thought about it. I remember waking up the next day, just in shock. Oh my God, Trump's president. But then some people just never really got over that shock. And it became this obsession, and this division with people. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but I also just do want to emphasize that, he does really talk about these transitions too, of how people are portrayed in society. He does divide the world into an empire, which was the mid to late 20th century, and then post-empire, which I would say started to transition after 9/11, is probably where the division, the most symbolic division, as we have moved into a different direction, and how people are perceived in society and what people got away with. He does talk about, I think Frank Sinatra is a good example. He brings up how, Frank Sinatra, he did drugs, he was a womanizer, he didn't have the cleanest background, and it never damaged his career. People have very nostalgic fondness for Frank Sinatra. I have family members who adore him, no one really thinks those bad things. However, when you think of this post-empire we live in, it can cancel anybody. And he uses Charlie Sheen as that example, where his drug use and womanizing ultimately led him to get fired from his TV show series 2.5 Men. But he was kind of this remnants left over from this empire, but just did not fit into this post-empire world. And he lists other actors too are really good examples of this, certain behaviors that were acceptable in the empire world, and just like had they been into the post-empire, there's no way they would have ever made it. So there is this concern to kind of tiptoe around things, to walk around eggshells in our society, and it kind of mirrors with with the political climate as well. How he observes people's responses, celebrities, how they responded. They would make these comments of just a disbelief that Trump won, wanting to blow up the White House, or their disappointment in certain things. However, they have millions of dollars and they have very nice houses they just sold for $30 million or whatever. And also he had friends himself too who were very, elite individuals who nothing really changed in their lives and they were living just fine, but yet somehow the election of this particular individual disrupted their life so greatly so. And Bret Easton Ellis is just fascinated how they have all these things going on in their lives. They're very successful. They got so much money. Yet this is like the biggest issue in their lives and they just can't get past it. I mean, it is an interesting thing to bring up. I never really thought of it myself during that time. But I know people were in shock. It was just like this hangover that people never got over. Over time, and he does talk about, American Psycho a bit more, and how like Patrick Bateman idolized Donald Trump and like the world to go with that. But that's just not something that I'm going to go into at this time. But he does talk about how in summer of 2018, that people started on the left and Democrats started to get a little frustrated with the, I guess, like whining, this unsettlingness, this like inability to just accept that Donald Trump was the president at that time. And, people apologizing for it or just making these comments. And it was almost, Bret Easton Ellis says that there was a notion of putting on the big boy pants, having a drink at the bar, and having difficult conversations were becoming sentimental. This whole thing. He talks about this young... actor, this gay actor, who was part of this movement in the summer of 2018 of #JustWalkAway, and why he and many other people were starting to now leave the Democratic Party. And Bret Easton Ellis shares what this young actor reflected on, saying that he rejected a system which allows an ambitious, misinformed, dogmatic group to suppress free speech, create false narratives, and apathetically steamroll over the truth. I reject hate. This is why I became a liberal. The same reasons I'm walking away. I thought it was like a really profound thing to say, just like this, just saying enough is enough. And, things were just getting to a level that just didn't seem to share the same, at least for this individual, and what Bret Easton Ellis is saying, didn't share the same values that they once carried, and it got a little bit maybe out of hand, a little bit too out of control, and it kind of does seem that kind of way from the things that I've observed of the Democratic Party so far right now in this current election era, with Trump being the Republican Party candidate in response to Kamala Harris. So I think that's that's really interesting, that this way of thinking and this disbelief and this aggression hasn't changed. And I, from my perspective, now being more aware of things, I would say maybe it's even accelerated. I'm very curious what Bret Easton Ellis would have to say today on the subject matter. I should follow his podcast. I thought it ended years ago, but apparently it's still going, so I should probably check that out again. there is a lot more in this book, and I apologize if I've repeated stuff. I just feel like there's just so much in this book that really, it jumps around a bit because there's just so many different parallels, and there's so many things that just like kind of go together. But it's an interesting take on, you know, Bret Easton Ellis is in an interesting position. You know, he's an author. He's known for writing very interesting things, but he's been so fascinated with these realistic things in our society that, you know, like when you think of American Psycho, like it was a very narcissistic world, and everyone wants to be like, and no one can tell who's who because everyone looks the same, and it's just this very strange world that Bret Easton Ellis was able to draw out, but also like kind of has a lot of weight in a lot of, it's like based almost in our reality. Like he said, the world of, you know, Patrick Bateman was on steroids in 2016 is what he saw. And, you know, he definitely, the emphasis of like social media, the things he posted on X or Twitter, formerly Twitter, and him even making the statement of, you know, there's people who said horrible things to me on my Twitter page, but I didn't block them, I didn't unfollow them, because once you start deciding how people can express themselves, then you start to open a door to allowing what other things will kind of alter your own reality and like maybe have an effect on your own goals and stuff. And I thought that was an interesting thing, because it's kind of like, yeah, people aren't going to agree with you all the time. And to just shield yourself from anyone who disagrees with you, then what kind of world is that are we living in? So, very good book. I listened to it a couple of times, and I'm just amazed. It's probably like, I think maybe 6.5 hours, the audio, and he just packs in so much. I mean, he even talks about Kanye West, working with him and his take on him, David Foster Wallace, and like his perspective of him, different bands, sexuality as well, like those, like, you know, like looking at dirty magazines as a kid and how it's very different now, how everything's instantly gratified, like we're instantly gratified by anything, and it kind of takes away like the secret, the mystery, the specialness of things. So again, he goes into so much more depth on certain areas that just reflecting on how much our society's really changed, and maybe things just don't have as much value as we used to place on stuff, and it's just it's a very interesting insight. Some of it's sad, some of it's shocking, and you know what? We're going to take it with a hopeful note. Hopefully we are able to see that we're not, maybe we can see that there's places where we can improve and get back on track, because at the end of the day, life's hard for everybody, and it's better if we just be nice to each other and move on. The end. That's my stance. So thank you so much for watching. This is a long video, and I hope you found it entertaining. And I'll see you next time, guys. Thank you.